Hey, it's my nerd world. Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, and I absolutely love Star Wars, in case you didn't know that already. Welcome to the show for this week. Holy cow, do we have a lot to talk about. You know, again, and this was supposed to be a week where there wasn't going to be a lot to talk about heading into D23 next weekend, but that's not the case. A whole bunch of stuff unofficially dropped. We'll talk about that. This stuff is unofficial drops. We'll start the show off, though, with a bit of clarification over Jon Williams' brother, the runtime of The Rise of Skywalker, the themes in the movie. I got a little ahead of myself, and there were plenty of you on YouTube and via my email who, rightfully so, messaged me to say that you thought that my viewpoint on the issue of what Don Williams said was wrong, and I tend to agree with you, so we'll get into that. Also on the show this week, someone just posted on Twitter, they are an editor of film, that if you're headed to D23, be prepared for something extraordinary. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I have my assumptions. There's a new video out called The Fandom Menace, which is an absolute must-watch if you're interested in looking at a detailed and comprehensive breakdown of the negativity in the fandom. If you're not, don't watch it. If you are, it is an absolute must-watch. And some of the takes on The Last Jedi that The Fandom Menace does are spectacular. So we'll talk a bit about that. Benioff and Weiss, the Game of Thrones guys, the role been downgraded in the Star Wars universe in the wake of this Netflix deal? We'll tell you the latest in that regard. Rian Johnson talks during his promotion of Knives Out and talks about the new Star Wars trilogy. That's funny. I thought he was fired. We'll get into that and the essence of Star Wars. Will Pedro Pascal's face ever be seen in Season 1 of The Mandalorian? We have some information on that. The big news from the week, of course, is Obi-Wan Kenobi returning to the screen, be it big or small, with Ewan McGregor reprising the role. We'll give you details on that. And we'll talk about, before we get to listener feedback, I heard on another show that I don't particularly care for, but I heard on another show this question being thrown out of how to fix Star Wars. Now, for me personally, I don't think Star Wars needs to be fixed, but it did get me thinking about what I would do if I were part of the story group for Lucas, or if I was in charge of content creation, what I would do with Star Wars moving forward when it comes to the live-action TV shows and when it comes to the films. So, all that is to say, there is a ton to get to on the show this week. This week's show is brought to you by EMBARK Treasure in Darkness, Book 2 in the EMBARK series. You can pick up both EMBARK Book 1 and the just-released Book 2 in ebook for only 99 cents a piece this weekend for those that may have been sitting on the fence. Talk a little bit more about that at the end of the show. So, let's not delay any further and get to a Star Wars podcast for this week.
We've passed on all we know. 1,000 generations live in you now. But this is your fight.
About what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
I've said this a lot on the show, but I'm going to keep repeating this. Just let it be a My Nerd World Star Wars podcast, Jon Justice PSA. Do yourself a favor and put away your iPhone and your iPad and the ancillary things when you sit down and watch Star Wars, or really any film. It makes such a world of difference. I sat down and watched my NASCAR race last night after watching a movie with the family, and had a little bit of time. I go to bed about 10 o'clock on Fridays, just because it's a long week, and that's actually staying up late for me because I go to bed at 7 o'clock every night, Sunday through Thursday. So I had a couple of different things that I could have watched, and I wanted to watch something Star Wars, so I put in the second half of Return of the Jedi. And I've mentioned on the show many times before that of all the Star Wars films, probably my least favorite, even though I love it. Turned off the lights and just watched the second half of Return of the Jedi. I didn't have my phone, didn't have my iPad, lights were off on my 60-inch screen TV. My 12-year-old came down and popped a squat on the couch next to me and watched it. He hasn't seen it that many times, so he really wasn't all that familiar with it. And just really enjoyed the experience. It was just such a reminder, once again, that when we're watching these films, you can do whatever you want, but I would encourage you, treat it like when you go to the theater. And that's what's special about the theater, especially now. That's why I pray the movie theater never goes away, because it's an event. It's something you do with your family. It's something you do alone. It's something you do with your friends. But you go there and you're there to see the film, and the lights go down and you're quiet in the theater and there's no other distractions, and you just sit back and take in what all these incredibly talented individuals did to tell this story on the big screen. And sitting down and watching the second half of Return of the Jedi last night was just a fantastic just really enjoyed it. Just treating it like I was back in the movie theater for a film that is, like I said, the least favorite of all the Star Wars movies, at least for now. Again, that's a moving list that changes on day and mood. All right, so there's a lot to get to on the show today. Let's start off here with a bit of clarification from last week before we dive into all the news that was rumored to be happening this week within Star Wars. And I'm going to play you a bit of this interview that caused such a controversy last week that in my excitement, I think I misinterpreted. Don Williams talking about the scoring of The Rise of Skywalker.
Don, you may know, is the brother of Jon, and he played on the original Jurassic Park as well as hundreds and hundreds of other scores. We only have Don for an hour, so we figured we'll just go ahead and get started with the study, because that'll give him a chance to catch us up on the things he's been up to, and then maybe a little bit of score study.
2 minutes.
Please do.
John started up with another Star Wars. We started on it last week. He's got 135 minutes worth of music to write. Okay, so that kind of tells you how long the film is. It is top to bottom music. We've done 4 days and we've just scratched the surface. I think we've got something like 34 minutes in the can at this point. But I can tell you that every theme that you ever heard is going to be compiled into this last effort. Everyone, Leia, Yoda, the Phantom, the Darth, all of it's going to be in there. And
okay, let me stop it here. So there was a lot of talk about what does this mean for the runtime of The Rise of Skywalker. My interpretation last week and what I was running with was that 135 minutes was the current edit of the film. And that's what John Williams had to work with. I know full well that not every single moment in a movie has a score behind it. And I think that's where some of the confusion came in. And I do appreciate all of the comments, and we'll get to a bunch of those when we get into listener feedback towards the end of the show. But I was looking at this as John Williams has 135 minutes of music to write. And I still think this is a possibility. Right. My initial take was that the current edit was 135 minutes, and so he had 135 minutes of footage that he needed to score, with the assumption that not all 135 minutes would be scored. Okay. It does seem like, in retrospect, listening to the totality of Don Williams' comments, that he is specifically saying he has 135 minutes he needs to write, and that should tell you how long the movie is. Knowing that not everything in a film is going to get music behind it, that would mean the film is probably another 20 minutes, half hour or so longer than 135 minutes. So it's as if John Williams, so it's one or the other. Either John Williams has seen a cut of the film that, let's say, is the length of The Last Jedi at 150 minutes, and he's spoken with JJ, and during the viewing of that edit of The Rise of Skywalker, they determined we're going to have music here, 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 and here. And when you total that up, it's 135 minutes worth of film that they need to score. So that's the one way, and I think probably the most logical way to look at, the most rational way to look at what Don Williams is saying. The other way to look at it was the way that I ran with it last week, and that is the edit of the film is currently 135 minutes. That's what he has to work with. The total score would be on par with what we've seen with other scores, and I think The Last Jedi was like 70 minutes worth of music. So, again, it's a Star Wars thing. It depends on your point of view, but I am changing my tune a little bit to what the majority of you are thinking, and that is he's got 135 minutes that needs music, meaning the film is much longer than that because not all of the film is going to go and have a piece of music behind it. So I was just so excited last week to get that little bit of detail that I kind of, in my excitement, ran with what I thought was a 135-minute runtime edit. That's what John Williams was working with. But it does seem like, and based off of other information that we've had as well, especially how big the script apparently is and the details that are now coming out about this movie, that it's going to be really long. And I've mentioned this many times. I was very much under the assumption after The Last Jedi, not knowing any details of what potentially is going to happen in The Rise of Skywalker, right? Being completely in the dark before seeing the trailer, before knowing about Sith troopers or any leaks about Palpatine's return or official news about that, I was under the impression that the movie did not need to be long, that you could easily wrap up this story, essentially, of what happens between Rey and Kylo. And again, this was before we had all the other information, based off of the way The Last Jedi ended, that you could easily wrap up the story in 2 hours. Much in the same way Return of the Jedi did. That doesn't seem to be the case. This looks to be a much larger film on a much bigger scale. And again, taking in some of the commentary from those involved with the picture, be it within production or the actors of the film, it certainly does seem, and based off the leaks, that this is going to be a massive epic film. So let's get into a bit of that as we head into D23 next week, and what we expect from D23 as we look through a lot, if not all, of the news that broke. A lot of it's still rumors, none of it official. We're going to get a lot of official stuff next week and at D23. But let's talk a little bit about expectations for next week and my expectations and why I'm getting increasingly excited about The Rise of Skywalker without even seeing anything new.
This is not going to go the way you think.
On Twitter, Vaughn, V-A-H-N, and his Twitter handle is I'm a Film Editor. He tweeted out, if you're headed to D23, be prepared for something extraordinary. And then he put up the logo for Episode 9. Now, you look at this guy's credibility stuff on Twitter. He's a film editor, a cinephile. Star Wars is life. He goes on to talk about he's a Marvel fan, Alita, superhero addict, lives in Los Angeles. He's got a large following. And in this, he tweeted out that if you're heading to D23, be prepared for something extraordinary. We know that they're going to be previewing The Rise of Skywalker at D23, right? We are fully aware of that. We've been told that by Disney and Lucasfilm. The expectation is, of course, the behind-the-scenes reel. I personally think that it would be a mistake, and this has been an ongoing conversation for many episodes now. I personally think that it would be a mistake for Disney not to change up their marketing plan and hype this film in a way they haven't hyped the previous 2 sequel trilogy films. This is the last one in the saga. And I'm praying that this silence that we've been receiving so far as we steamroll towards the end of August into September, and holy cow, before you know it, the holidays are here, right? Temperatures are already cooling off here in Minnesota. I'm praying that Disney and Lucasfilm begin the hype machine and start promoting this as the last of the Skywalker saga. and start bringing in all the other 8 films leading up to The Rise of Skywalker into the mix in the promotion of it. What will they reveal at D23 that could be extraordinary beyond the behind-the-scenes video? I don't know. Do they show a clip? Some people are speculating they would show the whole movie. I can't imagine for a second they will do that. I seriously doubt it. Will they go so far as to go ahead and drop another teaser just for the crowd there? There is a lot of hype heading in the next week, and as somebody who normally buys into that hype but has gotten really skeptical over the past 2 years of the rumor mill running with, we're going to get this on this date, because nobody really knows. There is an inordinate level of hype around something beyond a behind-the-scenes video for D23 next week. So backing up, though, I want to say this for a second. And I've mentioned this before, and again, when I repeat myself, I like to make it known. I think The Rise of Skywalker is going to be something truly special. J.J. Abrams is a fantastic filmmaker. And he had a very specific mission in mind when he set out to make The Force Awakens. And was probably, what's a better word? I don't want to say, he had to work within a box. And he has said that because of what he saw with Rian Johnson, and clearly, in my opinion at least, what we saw in the teaser trailer, that he's going for it with this film and not working in this box anymore. My friend Zach Weber over at Knights of Vader, the podcast that they did this week, was really, really interesting. They tried to go and take the writing of Chris Terrio, who wrote The Rise of Skywalker with J.J. Abrams, tried to take the writing of Chris Terrio and the other movies that he's written, Argo, Batman vs. Superman, and tried to apply, I think a bit of Justice League as well, tried to apply what Chris Terrio did in those films and the storytelling, and tried to apply that to what we could potentially get from Chris Terrio along with J.J. Abrams in The Rise of Skywalker. What was spawned from that particular idea and starting point for a conversation on the Knights of Vader podcast was a very interesting discussion just about storytelling and picking what you are going to go and focus on to tell the larger story. It was a really, really interesting conversation. And through all of it, it got me really excited for the possibility of what Chris Terrio could bring. Not because I think that he is a spectacular writer. I happen to really like the 3-hour director's cut of Batman vs. Superman. I really enjoy that film. I love Man of Steel, even though I don't think that Chris Terrio wrote Man of Steel. But I do like what they did with the longer cut. I don't like the theatrical edit of Batman vs. Superman. But what I think Chris Terrio provides, okay, is something that Lawrence Kasdan provided for J.J. Abrams, but in a different way for The Force Awakens. So it breaks down like this. J.J. Abrams gets hired to write The Force Awakens. Lawrence Kasdan is brought in to help craft that story with J.J. Abrams from a discarded script from Michael Arndt because he was taking too long. So Lawrence Kasdan and J.J. Abrams got together, went on these walks, recorded conversations about what the next Star Wars would be, what the story would be, and I believe this was loosely based off of what George Lucas was potentially going to do. But the role that Lawrence Kasdan played, in my opinion, and what we were told, was that because he'd written for some of these characters before, and because he'd written a few times in the Star Wars universe, he could provide that grounding for J.J. Abrams. He could be sort of the Lucas foil or the Lucas element to J.J. Abrams being the fan. So the movie becomes something other than just being like a fan film after all these years, which is a bit unfair, right? Other individuals directed The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and those weren't fan films, but George Lucas was directly involved. Having Lawrence Kasdan involved in The Force Awakens provided that Star Wars core grounding, and I think ended up creating that very loose mashup of all of the Star Wars films in The Force Awakens. I mean, look, let's be honest. If you took the characters of Han and Leia off the poster, let's I'm looking at the Star Wars Force Awakens poster right now. And this is not a dig, don't misunderstand, but I want to make a point. If you take the characters of Han and Leia off the poster, you remove Chewie and take off C-3PO and R2-D2, and remove the Millennium Falcon and the X-Wings, and replace them with some other ships with the cast of characters, it just looks like a Star Wars knockoff. You could, it's galaxy battles, right? The feeling rises, right? You could take the poster for The Force Awakens, take the elements out that we're also used to seeing, and looking at Rey and Finn and Kylo with a different type of lightsaber, and you could just say, well, that's just a copy of Star Wars. It's just a parody, right? It's a direct-to-video version of a film for people who would be duped and just want to see something that's like Star Wars. But of course, that's not what we got. We got this amazing Star Wars movie that continues the story from Episode 6 in different ways with new characters that evoke those characters that we've seen before, because an individual like Kylo Ren was inspired by what came before him in his grandfather. Okay, you all know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Lawrence Kasdan provided the grounding for The Force Awakens. What I like about what's happening with The Rise of Skywalker and what we know so far and what has me so excited is that, to me, Chris Terrio is now taking on more of the role of what J.J. Abrams did in The Force Awakens, to J.J. Abrams being the more grounded Star Wars writer of the two. So now you have J.J. Abrams taking on more of the Lawrence Kasdan role of, we got to keep this centered in the Star Wars universe. Let's make sure that all this connective tissue exists. You bring in a Chris Terrio, who's a massive fan of Star Wars, knows his Star Wars lore, but is going to be able to provide something unique and different to make this film not a send-up of Return of the Jedi. To close these 9 movies out and this Skywalker saga out with something truly big, unique, and special. When I wrapped up watching Return of the Jedi last night, as I often do, I went onto YouTube and I pulled up the Rise of Skywalker teaser trailer. And my heart raced with the thought of seeing new footage from this movie. I am so excited. I always am. And maybe, just like when it comes to political elections, right? The next election is the most important election in our lifetime. They say that before every single election. It doesn't matter. It could be a school board, city council, or city council local election. This is the most important election. Well, for Star Wars, it's the same thing. This is the most important Star Wars movie ever, especially now with the way the fandom is and the ability that we have to just spew out, pieces of information anonymously to let everybody know what every single thought is in our head. Never need a machine to read. We should never have a machine that reads minds. Because that's what Twitter is. It's a bunch of people with anonymous Twitter. Not all of it, but it's a big part of it is a bunch of people anonymously posting a bunch of garbage that's in their minds that nobody ever needed to hear before. Okay. So back to my point. I am so excited to just grab onto every single frame of this movie leading up to December. I'm so excited about the potential of these Sith troopers. The Sith fleet and the battle that may ensue. The comments from Oscar Isaac about how it's guerrilla warfare. John Boyega talking about Finn and Rose and how you're not going to get much of a relationship there because this is a galaxy at war. And this war that could potentially be raging in the middle of this very personal story of how Ben Solo and Rey Nobody are going to reconcile to go and bring balance to the Force. So getting back to this comment by this individual that may mean nothing. He could be just referring to the behind-the-scenes reel for The Rise of Skywalker. I am expecting, and I could be wrong, and I will absolutely admit it, just like I did with Don Williams and his runtime comments about The Rise of Skywalker. I think that this movie really steps outside the box of the sequel movies. I think that The Rise of Skywalker is going to be something that is going to tie all these movies together, but in ways that are going to shock us and take us to different places that we haven't seen before, largely inspired by what Rian Johnson did in The Last Jedi, by challenging us to think about these things in different ways and to broadening our understanding of the Force and taking Luke in a very unexpected but very relevant and accurate way down a different path than a lot of people would have expected. I think The Rise of Skywalker is going to be a movie that is going to be better compared to, say, one of the prequel films. The prequel films didn't really follow, for the most part, any sort of set of rules. And we as fans, we put those rules into our head, right? The ring theory, which I think is fascinating, by the way. I think the ring theory is fascinating. I think a lot of it is just coincidence. Watching Return of the Jedi last night, I couldn't help but see the parallels to The Last Jedi, right? In the throne room scene at the end, and some of the sequences of the battles, and I think that a lot of times we use what we think are things that are supposed to happen as a justification for liking or not liking something in a film, but you go back and look at the prequels, and you look at not so much a Phantom Menace, because the Phantom Menace does kind of follow a theme, right? It's poetry, it rhymes, that George Lucas comment. But you get into Attack of the Clones, and that is a much different movie. I love Attack of the Clones. You get into Revenge of the Sith, that is a much different film that we're used to seeing. And I really do think that when we get into The Rise of Skywalker, we're going to have something that is not only going to connect all the films together, but is going to be better compared to a film like Revenge of the Sith than it is Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi, the prequel, the original trilogy is very straightforward. And especially when you compare them with the prequels. It's not a dig at all, it just is. I mean, Return of the Jedi is a fairly simple film. In terms of location, we go to a forest planet, that's kind of recognizable. We're not going to a lot of different exotic places. We're seeing another Death Star again. The locations and stuff are a lot of things that we've seen. Tatooine, we've seen before. You get into like Revenge of the Sith, and that just blows the door wide open on what these films could be, and Attack of the Clones does too. And I think that The Rise of Skywalker is going to be something completely unexpected. It's going to be epic in scope, long in runtime, and because of that, Disney and Lucasfilm are holding everything about the film very close to the chest, because anything that they show is probably going to be noteworthy. And that's 27 minutes to get to that point. That's what has me excited. I think that the teaser trailer, which I absolutely love, and I think blows away the teaser trailer for The Last Jedi. I love the full trailer for The Last Jedi, but I'll be honest, the teaser trailer for The Last Jedi left me kind of flat. The teaser trailer for The Rise of Skywalker I absolutely love, but it too is very minimal in what it shows, and I think the reason is because any of those scenes that they showed, any other seconds of footage there is going to reveal something that's going to end up sort of blowing our minds. That scene, the very opening shot of Rey jumping over Kylo Ren's new TIE silencer. Whatever happens next is going to be epic. There's no doubt about that. She doesn't just flip over and land on her feet. She's doing something. I think she's taking that ship down. The battle where you see the A-Wing spinning past a Star Destroyer, everybody kind of universally agrees that Star Destroyer does not look like a First Order Star Destroyer. Why are Rey and Leia hugging? Where does that ship go to land that looks like exactly the same one from the Forceback scene in The Force Awakens? What happens next in that final shot where they're standing there in front of a destroyed Death Star at the end? I can't wait for the toy leaks. I can't wait to see the footage, and I can't wait to hear what Disney has to say coming up next week at D23. And there'll be multiple podcasts next week when it comes to D23, because we know we're getting Mandalorian stuff on Friday. So I'll definitely be posting up Blaster casts on the Blaster app. If you have an iPhone, go to theblasterapp.com, sign up. It's free. Download the app, pick your handle, build your profile, and follow me, Jon Justice, and my Nerd World. I'm now doing daily mini Star Wars Blaster casts talking about whatever news may have broke, and I did several this week, so definitely go and check that out. And you can also see them I share them on Twitter, because you can do that with the Blaster app. You follow me at My Nerd World, and you can hear that audio as well. So I'll be blasting out a lot of commentary. I'll be posting podcasts heading into into next week as well. So be sure to pay attention to the feeds and also to Twitter and the Blaster app as we head into D23 next week, and be prepared for something extraordinary. I am going to allow myself to get excited and think that we're going to get something beyond that behind-the-scenes reel, and I, for one, cannot wait.
I've seen this raw strength only once before. It didn't scare me enough then. It does now.
All right, just a quick mention again of this video that I watched, the Fandom Menace. It is about 47 minutes long, and it is so good and such a thoughtful, comprehensive insight and really entertaining insight into the negativity in the Star Wars fandom. And it does something that I'm so glad somebody went out there and did. It takes all these ridiculous comments from Den of Geeks and Geeks of Gamers and that Grace Randolph person, and it shows their clips and then just dismantles them with logic and rational thought. It is truly amazing. Now, unfortunately, and I'm no prude, but with kids in the house, unfortunately, it's laced with profanity. I wish the guy who had recorded it hadn't cursed so much. Be that as it may, it is absolutely worth a watch. And he does, in the middle portion of the video, he does this section where he talks at length about The Last Jedi and the people complaining about it, and just nails the points that Rian Johnson was trying to make in The Last Jedi, juxtaposed against some of the negativity and the ridiculous, irrational criticisms, right? There's a difference between not liking a film, okay? You don't have to like The Last Jedi, and you can choose whatever reason not to like The Last Jedi. What the Fandom Menace video does is it takes the actual comments made and turns them on its head by sort of saying, look, you're entitled to have your opinion, but based off of what you said, factually speaking, it's wrong. I really would encourage you, if you're into that kind of thing, and you want to see a really good, comprehensive, entertaining breakdown of why the fandom is doing what they're doing with all the negativity, and who's bringing it on, where all this is coming from as well. It really is worth the watch. Again, it's called The Fandom Menace, and it's spectacular. You'll find it on YouTube. I can't encourage you enough to go and check it out.
Fulfill your destiny.
All right, one of the items, and we'll work through some of the news items that broke this week, and they're all kind of surrounding the Obi-Wan Kenobi news, which we'll also obviously get into. But according to The Hollywood Reporter, sources say the Game of Thrones pair of Benioff and Weiss is writing a treatment for a Star Wars trilogy and is committed to penning at least one of the films. All right. So this certainly sounds different than when this was originally announced a couple of years ago, that the Game of Thrones guys, before the final season of Game of Thrones, were going to be involved with making a Star Wars trilogy. This was alongside also the Rian Johnson Star Wars trilogy, which we'll also talk about during the show this week. I'm going to leave some of the criticism aside, and using that criticism of the Game of Thrones guys in the final season of Game of Thrones as a justification to make points about what this potential news can mean. The reality is, unless you work for Netflix or Star Wars or Disney, Lucasfilm, we don't know what in the world's going on behind the scenes, and this could have been part of the plan all along, and it was us as fans that extrapolated further about the Game of Thrones involvement in Star Wars back when it was announced, and we created our own reality of them making 3 films, when in reality, this was the plan all along. I don't know if that's the case. I'll say this much. I don't really care. I would like to know what's going on. I'm not bothered at all by the Game of Thrones guys making Star Wars. Kathleen Kennedy has shown time and time again that she will do what is necessary to make sure that these products turn out good, and I've been absolutely satisfied with every single Star Wars movie release since Disney took over. I love all of those films, despite all the controversy surrounding them. I enjoyed the final season of Game of Thrones. I thought those last 2 episodes were spectacular. I had no problem with Daenerys' arc And the way that the way the whole thing ended, fans are entitled to their opinion. And regardless of the way that Benioff and Weiss handled the end of that franchise, there was no way they were going to be able to make everybody happy. The question in my mind is, what movies are coming first? And I'm getting more and more of the opinion that Rian Johnson's films are actually coming before the Benioff and Weiss films are coming, especially with this Netflix deal. But that was one of the big news stories this week. Make of it what you will. I'll continue to say this throughout the show. I really do hope that a part of D23 is going to be an announcement of the expectation of the future Star Wars movies and who is going to be going first. Okay. With that being said, let's move right over to Rian Johnson. So this was some pretty big news this week, and this to me is the most exciting news, even beyond the Obi-Wan Kenobi potential live-action TV show, which I am excited about. I am more excited about this. I'll share with you the version from Chris Evangelista from Slash Film. Rian Johnson's next movie this year, in this year's ensemble Mystery Knives Out. But after that, he'll be returning to a galaxy far, far away for his new Star Wars trilogy. Much of Johnson's trilogy remains cloaked in secrecy. In fact, the only thing we know is that it will be set entirely out of the Star Wars mythology. No Skywalkers, no Death Stars, no Snoodles. Johnson offered up the teeniest bit of insight into his new Star Wars trilogy, and it sounds as if he's looking to the original trilogy for inspiration. Despite what some folks on the internet might want to think, Rian Johnson is still making his new Star Wars trilogy. He said as much several times, and just reiterated the fact again in a new interview with The Observer. As you might guess, Johnson was cagey on specific details. He's not going to come out and tell us what the point of this trilogy is, but he did reveal how he's approaching the films. And he said this: I think that the fun and challenging part is to dive in and figure out what's exciting and then figure out what it's going to be. We're doing something that steps beyond the legacy characters. What does that look like? To me, the blue sky element of it is what was most striking about it. I know the way that I'm coming at it, what's fun about it for everyone is George Lucas's films is figuring out what's the next step. It really makes you think and figure out what the essence of Star Wars is for me and what that will look like moving forward. Now, this is a very John-centric take on this. Okay, this is my point of view and why this has me excited beyond just my love of The Last Jedi. Okay, what has me excited about this is, and I'll clarify, is everything that Rian Johnson said. Rian Johnson, to me, of all the Star Wars content creators beyond George Lucas, is the closest one to George Lucas. And that doesn't mean he's as good as George Lucas, right? Or, in some cases, as bad as George Lucas. But what it means is, when it comes to his vision and the way that he approaches projects, in my opinion, it is very fresh and new. It's rich in its storytelling. It's adult in its themes while still being accessible for children. That's the difference between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi to me. The Force Awakens was very much sort of a straightforward Star Wars film with a lot of homages and connections and visual cues and action cues and stylings to make sure that we all got those nostalgic fifis fed while watching it. But it wasn't necessarily deep when it comes to lore or the Force or interpersonal struggle. It kind of just danced. It kind of danced around it, right? When you apply The Last Jedi and what we learn of the relationship between Ben and Rey to what we saw in The Force Awakens, and The Force Awakens and those scenes become much more powerful. And I very much expect that similar thing is going to happen with The Rise of Skywalker. But that's the beauty, in my opinion, of what Rian Johnson did with The Rise of Skywalker with The Last Jedi, is that he made this film that had a lot of different layers going on, man, and it was deep. Luke was struggling. It was challenging in a lot of ways, for those that liked it and certainly for those that didn't like it, for the adult viewer of this film. You know, the moment in The Last Jedi when Luke is talking with Rey, right? And this is a good moment to kind of zero in on, and not a dig on J.J. Abrams, but this just the difference, right? But that moment when Rey goes into the cave with the ancient Jedi texts, and Luke goes, "Why are you here?" And she says, "I'm here for the Resistance." And then Luke goes, No. Why are you here? Right? Then we get to the heart of it. See, that's a fandom thing, right? That didn't get touched upon. That is something that as a fan, you could easily look at that scene and let's just say it went straight up. Why are you here? I'm here because the Resistance sent me. We need you because the Kylo Ren is lost in the dark side of the Force and the First Order is gaining power in the galaxy and we need your help. And then we kind of just brushed upon Rey's ability and training. And we could have sat back and looked at it and goes, well, that wasn't really, why send Rey? You could have sent anybody from the Resistance. She just just got there, for crying out loud. Nobody knew who she was. No. That was only a small part of the reason why they went. Leia sent her to that island to Luke because she had something in her that was awake and she needed help. And that's where Rian Johnson took it to that next level. No, why are you here? Something inside me is awake, right? And I need help. And I'll play you the audio that I normally play a little bit later on, and we'll do it again. And this was later on in the film, but,
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
So he did this movie that's got this level of depth to it, right? He added these exchanges. He needed Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, and Rey to be able to interact, and so we found this mechanism that's been written before in Star Wars lore about this Force connection, this Force Skype that takes place. Rey goes to the dark side cave. She doesn't find what she's looking for. She's challenged even more. Right, the dark side cave, by the way, is interesting too. Did you ever stop to think about that, just real quick? I don't buy into the whole the mirror image was linking to her being a clone. I don't buy any of that. Rian Johnson, from what I remember, Rian Johnson said that he had that mirror image scene like before he even started writing. So I imagine that's before they even said, "Hey, Rey's a blank." He had that image in mind. Okay. Be that as it may, what's interesting to me about the dark side cave is that she went into the dark side cave, right, had something you needed, you were drawn to it, you didn't even fight it, right? This is why Luke was freaked out, which is also why I think when, at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, when Ben Solo gets redeemed along with Rey, both of them are going to be a nice little balance of the Force, and that was certainly included with Rey, who didn't hold off from going to the dark side cave, right? She just went right there. But I think there's a potential that the dark side cave could have been lying to her. Right. The dark side cave could have been deceiving her. But I don't want to wipe out on that. That's a story for another time, just like Maz Kanata would say. Back to Rian Johnson again. So Rian Johnson does this very adult Star Wars movie. In my opinion, the most adult Star Wars movie. Watching The Last Jedi earlier this week and the finger touching loving scene, it's an incredible moment within Star Wars, but just in filmmaking and the brilliance. And in my opinion, I'm not overstating it. The brilliance of what Rian Johnson did in that moment to create this incredibly intimate moment between these two characters in this hut who aren't even like physically in the same location, fully clothed, just touching fingers. Right? It's an amazing piece of filmmaking. How can you make something that sensual, we'll keep it PG. I have other words in my head, but we'll keep that intimate. You made a scene that intimate and just two people touching fingers, for crying out loud. It's brilliant. But on top of all that, you have this film that's incredibly fun for kids to watch. Those scenes don't resonate nearly as much. They're very simple scenes. Oh, they touch fingers, they're talking. That's fine and dandy. And it's very much the same way that George Lucas did it, even though George Lucas didn't go quite as deep. In A New Hope, he did add in those themes and those difficulties and those adult themes of right and wrong and striking out on your own and the hero's journey. But it was all surrounding this story that was filled with all these wonderful, fantastic elements and creatures and vehicles and space battles and planets that children could latch onto. watching Return of the Jedi last night, I had to laugh because people will criticize The Last Jedi for the jokes at the beginning of General Hugs, which don't bother me at all. I enjoy them. The milking the sea cow on Octo, right? The gag of the laundry room when they steal the clothes on the Supremacy. I'm watching, for crying out loud, I'm watching Return of the Jedi last night. There's a person in a tiny bear costume who gets on a speeder bike, can't touch the foot control pedals, is being chased by Imperial troopers on speeder bikes, and then happens to find a dangling vine and jumps off and swings. I mean, and you're going to give The Last Jedi? I'm sorry. I just don't buy it. But that's the brilliance of what Rian Johnson did. And that's what has me so excited for what he will do for a Star Wars trilogy. Because in my mind, there is no better person attached to Lucasfilm right now who can figure out what the essence of Star Wars means for them, because that's important. We need it to be genuine and authentic. Because it's different things for different people, right? Star Wars, with what George Lucas created, he never expected it to go the way that it went. He set out to make this updated version of the stories that he was told as a kid, going off the hero's journey. And I believe that Rian Johnson, as opposed to the Benioff and Weiss guys, so let's say that the Game of Thrones guys are going to do Old Republic. We've got Old Republic lore. There are expectations, I think, for a lot of fans of what that can be. And you're going to be playing with a lot of traditional rules that have already been established in the existing films of the Force, the Jedi Knights, and the Sith, even though we'll probably get that expanded upon if we go back in time. But for Rian Johnson, if he does something that's within the current timeline, outside of the Skywalker trilogy, but it still is the current timeline, then he can start fresh with a brand new story and perhaps latch on to a different type of hero's journey, a different type of story that we've been told, through generations, and update it and grab onto it and create this mythology and the story and characters that we want to follow in the same way that we did A New Hope. And that's what has me, along with all the other ways that I've been explaining, excited about it, is that for Star Wars, as I've said, to survive, you're going to have to bring about new characters, a new set of mythological guidelines and rules within the existing Star Wars rules that we can all grab onto, that we can go on this journey with again. We entered into A New Hope and saw this fantastic world and the storytelling that we've never seen before. It captured our imagination all around the globe, and then it just left us wanting more. I want more of this. And I'll just speak again. This is where the John part of it comes in, and this is, again, I'm going to pitch the book at the end of the podcast. This is not a pitch to buy my books, but it is a way for me to sort of lend my own experiences to what I hope Rian Johnson does. I'm also very excited because what Rian Johnson potentially is going to do for his Star Wars trilogy is exactly what I wanted to do and what I've been trying to do with the sci-fi stories that I wrote. I wanted to write something that felt like Star Wars that wasn't Star Wars. I wanted to write stories set in space that had amazing vehicles, right? But I knew I had to base it off Earth because I didn't want to rip off Star Wars. And I don't want to have any direct action sequences that are like Star Wars. I just want to capture the essence of that fun, the characters, the struggles that they have together, the romance that they have together, fighting off evil in very stark terms, good versus evil, and then the middle part where people are confused and don't really realize what it is they're fighting for. That's what I really tried to do in the first two books and what I'm trying to do in the whole trilogy in my EMBARK series. And so to see Rian Johnson going and tackling essentially what I tried to do in my stories without making a Star Wars, but him trying to make it as Star Wars, has me incredibly excited. I can't wait to find out what it is that he is going to do and the story that he wants to tell that could hopefully inspire generations to continue to follow this amazing, spectacular franchise. And I'm just praying that it's his movies that are coming up first. I really do. I hope that when he gets Knives Out finished, that 2022 movie is the first of the Rian Johnson trilogy. I think that would be, after this long break that we're going to get, after The Rise of Skywalker, I think that would be the best move. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of my ideas towards the end of the show of, if I were in charge at Lucasfilm, what I would like to see done.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
All right, so the bigger news this week was Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor signing on to play the character once again. So this was originally broken by Cinelinx. There was a lot of stupid nonsense among different podcasts and websites that were pitching a fit over who broke the story first. It was really dumb. People taking themselves way too seriously. Like, there was this one, I saw this exchange where somebody was annoyed that, hey, we reported on this, months ago, so let's give credit where credit's due. Well, I'm sorry, but months ago when it was reported on, you might have been right in your details, but it was never confirmed. What we have here is a flash forward in time where other people got this confirmed as well, and it happened to coincide with official Hollywood publications like Deadline and The Hollywood Reporter saying, yes, indeed, Ewan McGregor is either in talks or he's signed on the dotted line. So be that as it may. At first, it sounded like it was going to be a film, and that was the original talk. Was it Robert Daltrey? Something Daltrey had written a treatment for an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, and then that got shelved after what happened with Solo. What we're hearing now is that Ewan McGregor has signed on to play Obi-Wan Kenobi in a Disney Plus series. Looks to be about 6 to 8 episodes. Somebody mentioned that there'll be a mechanical co-star with him that has them excited. I think there's a lot of different speculation about whether or not that means sort of the half-mechanical Maul, whether or not that means that's Darth Vader in some way, shape, or form, or whether or not C-3PO or R2-D2 come into the mix somehow. Look, I'm excited for an Obi-Wan Kenobi show. I want to see us move forward in the timeline. I don't particularly need to keep going back. Like, I'm more excited for The Mandalorian because The Mandalorian takes place right after Return of the Jedi, and so I'm very curious about that particular timeline. The new season of Resistance, that trailer dropped this week, and it's going to be the second and final season. And while I really enjoyed the first season, it was scaled down for kids, right? It was geared more towards young kids, and so I didn't end up loving it because of that, but the final 2 episodes of Resistance were spectacular. And the trailer for Season 2, which starts in October this year and will end before The Rise of Skywalker comes out, looks really cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing the storytelling leading up to The Rise of Skywalker. And it seems pretty clear why they're only doing 2 seasons, because this is leading into The Rise of Skywalker. So that has me excited. The Cassian Andor series, it depends on what they do. With the Cassian Andor series, I hope that they end up going back to some prequel locations. I think that would be great. Obi-Wan Kenobi, I'm excited just because Ewan McGregor will be reprising the role, but until I know kind of what that storyline's going to be, I'm going to reserve really getting super excited about it, because I don't know what that can be, right? We know that Obi-Wan Kenobi was watching over Luke on Tatooine. We've seen a little bit of what that looks like in the Rebels cartoon. We've already resolved the situation between him and Maul in the Rebels cartoon, for those that don't already know. So unless they're planning on doing a live-action version of that, or not having that Rebels episode be canon anymore, I don't know how you tell the Darth Maul story again. I would be somewhat curious to see when Obi-Wan Kenobi ends up finding out that Darth Vader is actually Anakin Skywalker, because I think we pretty much assumed that Obi-Wan Kenobi thinks that Anakin is dead. So I'd be curious when he first finds out about Darth Vader. But needless to say, a lot of people are excited about it, and I understand why, and I am too. But I'm way more excited about what Rian Johnson has to offer for the bigger films than I am for what we may be getting on the Disney Plus streaming service. And speaking of streaming, I may have glossed over it, but MakingStarWars.net did put out an article talking about The Mandalorian, and how in the first season of The Mandalorian, which we'll get a trailer for at the end of this coming week on Friday, most likely out of D23, that Pedro Pascal may not take the helmet off at all in the first season. And that when he does take the helmet off, it'll be revealed as something special. So they're going to try to keep to this mystique of the Mandalorian and keep Pedro Pascal behind the helmet for the entire first season, which I think is a rather interesting, bold move. It also sort of points my speculation in the direction of this was initially supposed to be a Boba Fett series, and they wouldn't let Jon Favreau do Boba Fett. So they let him do The Mandalorian instead. I think that there's a possibility that it could end up being Boba Fett, but I'm not holding my breath on that. That being said, I think that what Jon Favreau originally wanted to do was a Boba Fett live-action show, and they're like, you can't, but you can do a Mandalorian, and that's what we're going to end up getting. So we may not see the mask at all in The Mandalorian, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the further footage, the official footage on that. I watched some of the leaked footage from Celebration where somebody had used the they have the film editing software where it can stabilize the shaky film. So I watched a couple of the trailers that they showed, and it's hard to watch because it's grainy and it's shot on a phone and looks like it was shot through a potato. But it still got me excited for what we could end up getting later on this week out of D23. All right. One more item of note before we get into listener feedback this week.
Let the past die.
Kill it. If you have to. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be.
I was listening to a bit of the Rule of Two show from Collider. I'm not going to lie, I'm not the biggest fan of that show. I don't know. The hosts on it are okay. They're good enough guys. There's just a lot of negativity on there, and a lot of takes that I just don't agree with. But the guy that runs Collider is one of the hosts on the show, and he asked one of the other guests that was there. They were talking about Galaxy's Edge and another female employee that works for Collider, and Bob Iger, during the recent IgerCon press, the stockholders call where he was talking about the low attendance of Galaxy's Edge, and of course there's been a lot of nonsense about whether or not this is Disney failing and blah, blah, blah. Don't want to get into any of that. But what he said and what he asked was, how would you fix Star Wars? And first off, I just don't like the premise of that question. Star Wars isn't broken, okay? We're in society, the way that we look at movies is broken. It's not just Star Wars, for crying out loud. And that Fandom Menace video really encapsulates that really, really well. He really sort of latches on to how this is not exclusive to just the Star Wars fandom. You look at Gamergate, you look at Release the Snyder Cut. The female host on the Rule of Two podcast made a really good point. And she said that we just live in a world right now where the way that we examine films is broken. Everybody instantly becomes an analyst. And if you had released the original trilogy today, it would get lambasted. And all these things, like I pointed to earlier in the show, about ridiculous, childish things in the original trilogy that seem to get a pass while people go and poke fun at the jokes Rian Johnson wrote for The Last Jedi. It's really sort of hypocritical and disingenuous, and it's more indicative of the fact that we just are really bad at analyzing films now. And like I said, the way that we can put out information on YouTube and social networking behind anonymous names and, never have to face somebody face to face and say something stupid and have them go, that's a really dumb assessment. Okay. So, but to this thought of fixing Star Wars, okay, I want to rework that for a second and turn that into, what would I do? Okay. What would I do with Star Wars moving forward? How would I approach the filmmaking, the storytelling, tying everything together? I have some very specific ideas about things that I would genuinely like to do. And a lot of it relates back to what we've been talking about this week when it comes to the Benioff and Weiss film they're writing and trilogy treatment, when it comes to what Rian Johnson might do, when it comes to what Obi-Wan Kenobi might do, and The Mandalorian as well. I think there are ways that Disney, and they may still be doing this and we haven't seen the whole picture yet, but there are ways that Disney could very easily go and start connecting all of these dots within the Star Wars fandom or within the Star Wars creative content so that they all tie in together the way that the Marvel Cinematic Universe does without doing what the Marvel Cinematic Universe did. Okay, that's your tease. I will tell you what I would do if I ran Star Wars after we get through with listener feedback this week.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
You can always email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or drop me a comment on YouTube. Now, several of the comments starting off listener feedback this week, I directly commented about when it comes to the runtime and Don Williams at the start of the show. That being said, it does afford me the opportunity to go back and talk a little bit more about it. So, ObiWan Kenobi writes this. He wasn't talking about the runtime of the movie. He was talking about how many minutes of music John was scoring. For example, The Last Jedi had 78 minutes of music, but the actual film was much longer. So basically, 135 minutes for The Rise of Skywalker is nearly twice as much music as was recorded for The Last Jedi. The actual runtime of the film will be much longer than 135 minutes because not every scene has music. I do agree, and again, I'm not going to repeat everything I said at the start of the film. Thank you for the comment. But Don Williams did say that the movie was scored top to bottom. So I think there's going to be sort of a medium here. I think that 135 minutes is a hell of a lot of music to write for the film. There probably is much more of this film that is scored than previous movies. That being said, the film is still probably going to be longer, much longer than 135 minutes. Okay. JG writes this with regard to the Kylo Ren Lego leak with the cracked, repurposed helmet. A bald Kylo, yep, they're all bald until you put their hair on. That would be the Lego. People saying Kylo will be bald are unfamiliar with how that works. My boys coined a term for the Sith glue way back when it was still unconfirmed. They constantly chorused, and I fixed this helmet with Kyber Seal. That's really funny. A la the Flex Seal infomercials. Mel Brooks would be proud. I would agree. That's pretty funny. They go on to say, I hope we get an epically long episode to close this out. I've always said that I'll sit through Gone with the Wind's movie length to get a fantastic closure to this saga. I don't think it will be that long, but I wouldn't mind if it were at all. Totally agree. Friend of the show, Jordan Davis, says this. Another great episode on all things Star Wars, but I think it's interesting that The Rise of Skywalker is 135 minutes if it stays that way after all the editing process, because I've been hearing rumors that it's going to be the biggest Star Wars movie in the saga in length. Or it could have just been meaning the things that happen in the movie are big. But I think it would be interesting if they use the romantic themes from the Star Wars movies, since The Rise of Skywalker will be focusing on the personal relationship of Ben and Rey. Thank you, Jordan. I agree. Josh Stickles writes this, again, to the movie length. 135 minutes is how much score they have to do. The movie is not going to have 100% music. No movie does. And even Don said that, so I bet the movie is 150 minutes plus. Christina B. writes this. So we're going to get some Across the Stars? One can only hope, right? We better, kind of thing? All right. Let's go to... Ardaraith. I probably butchered that, and I apologize. I watched the documentaries for each episode yesterday, Hiding from the Heat, and I just love all the episodes, even Jar Jar, after meeting the actor. Thank you very much. Let's see. Let's go to Shock Fitness. I couldn't tell you why logically, but my favorite part in any Star Wars was in Empire Strikes Back when Han said it's a good bet the Empire knows we're here. It was just great storytelling and had such an underrated part of Star Wars that history has kind of forgotten. The drama of trying to leave Hoth before the Empire arrives. Yeah, man, there's so many little moments like that in just all the Star Wars films. Little subtle things that I absolutely love. Friend of the show, Agnes, says the Last Jedi soundtrack was 77 minutes. By the way, side note, when it comes to my EMBARK science fiction space opera stories, for those that read them or for those that do read them, those books, and I don't hide this, and if anybody asked me, I would fully admit it. I filled I filled those books with little tiny bits of Star Wars dialogue. There are and not just Star Wars either. There's at least one or two from Hunt for Red October in the first book. But in the book, I included little odes and homages to the Star Wars films by tiny little bits of dialogue that I used and little phrases to evoke that, things that reminded me of that. I did that in very sort of subtle ways, and I also did that in very blatant ways. There are moments, because the main character, Taft, who basically is kind of he's me, essentially. He's got the most me of all the characters in the book. But in the books, he's a massive Star Wars fan, and so he makes a lot of Star Wars references in the way that he speaks as well. Let's see. Leah Loverly says, podcast for my birthday. Thank you, John. Great one as always. Happy birthday, Leah. I hope it was a fantastic one. Black-Eyed Lily writes this. I can imagine Duel of the Fates playing during the climactic fight between Kylo, Rey, and Palpatine. How epic. Totally agree. Starlover writes this. When it comes to Ben wearing the helmet again, what if whoever wears the helmet is named Kylo Ren like a title? So there is a Kylo Ren, but Kylo Ren and Ben are not the same person in the movie. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it makes sense. Tony says this. The mind-blowing set is the medal ceremony room from A New Hope. Informed speculation. Thank you for the comment. Disney Desi says, all the previous music includes Across the Stars, also the Anadala Love theme. Wonder when they could use that music. By the way, just a side note, I don't take his comment of all the themes quite as literal as I think a lot of people are. And it might have been Zach on Knights of Vader, but somebody made a comment that when you're talking about themes, it doesn't mean that every single element of music is going to be in the film. I think they just are focusing on like sort of the main themes. So if that's what people are referring to, then yeah. But even then, right, I don't think John Williams set out to write the score for The Rise of Skywalker going, I'm going to get every single theme in there, baby. No, I think he just ended up including it where it was relevant. All right. Temzaro S says this. Every second Star Wars movie is similar in that it's more complicated than its predecessor, and in that it twists and warps and averts fandom expectations. From this point of view, the 3 trilogies so far have been structured amazingly well, with every sequel functioning as a kind of intensifier pivot in the overall flow of the story. Attack of the Clones, The Empire Strikes Back, and The Last Jedi. All are extraordinary counterpoints in this space saga's breathtaking mythology. I would actually argue, too, that is more akin to the 3-arc structure of storytelling, right? It's not necessarily unique to Star Wars. The middle act, as Lawrence Kasdan said when talking about The Empire Strikes Back, is when everything goes to hell. And that's the way that I wrote my stories. So he's right in what Attack of the Clones, The Empire Strikes Back, and The Last Jedi do, those being the 3 favorite films of all three trilogies so far, for me, because of that very reason. And when I wrote the second book in my series, Treasure in Darkness, that's exactly what I set out to do. This middle chapter is going to be a tighter story, a shorter story than the opening epic of EMBARK. It's also going to be a more personal story and one where our heroes are going to have to struggle mightily as we head into the final major act of this 3-arc story structure. Friend of the show, Severin, writes this. When I first noticed that the music on Octo in The Last Jedi was a callback to Kamino's theme, at first I thought, oh, that's clever, it was raining. Of course, he's using it here in the misty, foggy, rainy, foggy planet to demonstrate the same feeling. So I can totally see John Williams sneaking in bits of past themes from all the other movies and places that may not necessarily be a direct reference to a character, planet, or scene, but rather as a tool to evoke a similar feeling, presence, or memory, or other visceral reaction that we may have felt in a similar situation from a previous film. Personally, I'd love it if he could score Kylo's theme in a major key and then weave it in with Leia's theme, hopefully for a modern son reconciliation purposes. But I'm just dreaming, but who am I kidding? I would way rather he weave it with Rey's theme, because Reylo romance trumps motherly love in my book. Sorry, I said it. Don't apologize. I completely agree. I never picked up on this And I don't know if I saw it on Film Joy or if on the Fandom Menace video. I think it was the Fandom Menace video. The beginning of The Last Jedi. After the crawl, the musical cue, and the right? That's the opening of what they used in A New Hope. It's the first music you hear after the crawl finishes, before and then the Star Destroyer comes overhead. John Williams used that at the beginning of The Last Jedi, and I always liked it, but I never put the correlation together. The potential reason why he did that, he did that because it was a callback to A New Hope, where in A New Hope, Princess Leia was attempting to escape from the Empire chasing her down. At the beginning of The Last Jedi, what's happening? Princess Leia is attempting to escape as the First Order is chasing them down. It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Lucas writes this: there is no chance at all that the fight between Kylo and Rey takes place at the end of the movie. In fact, it's probably going to be pretty early. Rey and Kylo are kind of going to work out a lot of their problems during that fight. At the end of it, they are mostly going to be on the same page and ready to team up. I don't disagree. However, I will say this, that I'm pretty sure there's two different major battles in the film. I think that we get the Force Flash fight between Rey and Kylo Ren sometime in the beginning to middle of the movie, and then they have to team up to battle most likely a returning Palpatine. But then I also think at the end of the film, they're going to have to fight it out again for whatever reason. And I've gotten into more of this in the spoiler territory. So I think you're going to have two different battles taking place. You're going to have one in the beginning with the Force Flash fight that's going to bring them together. But at the end, circumstances are going to strain the situation once again, and they're going to have to fight together or against each other because of the way the story breaks out on the destroyed Death Star on wherever planet or moon it landed on. All right, back to listener feedback. IJ writes this. This is probably just a misunderstanding, but I'm a bit confused about you saying that the movie will be around 135 minutes. And again, this is just more conversation about my misunderstanding of the way the runtime was going to work out. I enjoyed the episode. I can't wait for the next. Hopefully we'll get some more official stuff. Yeah, we'll be getting that next week. And I can't wait for it. All right. Miranda writes this. I want to start out by saying that I honestly do not care how long this movie is. That cracks me up. Good for you, Miranda. I doubt it's going to be as long as Endgame. Maybe it'll be close to Infinity War's runtime. Maybe longer than The Hunger Games Catching Fire. I don't even give... let's see. I don't even want to know how much money it's going to make the opening weekend to Throne. It doesn't matter. I don't care about the money because I'm not a shareholder. I don't care about the length of time because since when did obsessing over a movie's runtime become a thing? Just saying. I don't care about the rumors of who said what and that which actor, actress said this or that, what YouTuber is talking about for the 100th time, or at least this is how I feel, or actually this is what we should all be doing moving forward as we're heading into what is right now the calm before the storm. I have no idea what's going to go down in the next 5 months as each passing day is getting closer, but you know what I don't have to know. I don't need to know what's coming. I only know how I feel right now. I'm excited, I'm scared, I'm anxious. I'm mostly really, really excited for this movie because I know it's going to be an amazing experience, or at least that's what I'm anticipating. Look, I certainly understand your sentiment there, Miranda. I think we all sort of enjoy our fandom differently. I'm so glad you listened to the show. I obviously love all the speculation and talk and just trying to keep it positive, that's all. But we're all entitled to our opinion, and I'm just glad that you are excited. All right, Temazaro S. was back and writes this. I'm enthralled by the idea of a hidden Sith army in the unknown regions. It's a great idea. In fact, it's the best way to kick off the rise of Skywalker. Yeah, man, I totally agree with that. Renee writes this. Hi, John. I want to thank you for creating these wonderful podcasts. Thank you, Renee. I enjoy your thoughtfulness and enthusiasm of all things Star Wars. You are indeed my favorite channel. Wow. Very best wishes from the UK. Thank you very much for that, Renee. It was very nice. Anthea Gaia, fantastic show as always. I love hearing that John Williams will be incorporating themes from the saga into the score of The Rise of Skywalker. It's one of the things that I love about his work. But how much do you think he is really privy to in regards to the overall story arc to be able to hide things in the score? Obviously, he knows the whole story now when scoring 9, but how much did he know for 7 and 8? That's a very, very good question. I do not know. And I don't think he's ever said how much of that. That'd be an interesting question for an interview with John Williams. All right. Friend of the show, Jennifer Oliver, says this. However long it is, I decided what I really want out of The Rise of Skywalker. I want a Reylo version of I Love You, I Know. We already have You're Not Alone, Neither Are You. But I'm looking for one with love in it. Still really enjoying Treasure in Darkness, not none yet, but it's getting even more exciting. Thank you, Jennifer. She goes on to say, longer, please. As long as they make it, I still want more. And then one more comment came actually this morning in the middle of when I was recording. Friend of the show, Sky Drathic, writes this. Wow, I had to laugh too. That wonderful poor man about the 135 minutes. Huh. That is about average, isn't it? And no, I don't give a crap about Rey's parents and Snoke's past. Star Wars fans are so keen on knowing the past that they aren't ready for the future. Thank you much, Sky Drathic. I appreciate the comment. And that wraps up listener feedback for this week. I still have a little bit more to cover on the show, but you can always email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and or drop me a comment on YouTube. Next week's going to be a very, very busy show. So before we get to what I would do if I was in charge of The Rise of Skywalker, please indulge me for just a moment while I promote, for those newer listeners to the podcast, my science fiction space opera trilogy, the opening trilogy in my series of books, EMBARK. And here is the promotion for the first book. For Earth, the end is near. Only a reluctant hero and the girl he loves have the power to save humanity's future. It's the not-so-distant future, and car culture is replaced by air and space flight, made possible by two of Earth's largest corporations. Flight mechanic Taft Guardia spends his free time racing through the skies with his 3 best friends and the girl he longs to be with, headstrong Kaitha Morrow. With the planet on the brink of an industrial apocalypse, a powerful and ruthless corporate madman, Sint Argum, moves to exploit the disaster with his covertly created military. When Taft, Kaitha, and their friends uncover a shocking secret, Sint Argum will stop at nothing to find them. Time on Earth is running out, but with the help of a ragtag group of young pilots, they'll fight for humanity's future and survival among the stars. I'll have a few more details of how you can take advantage of a special offer as we get to the end of the show. That is Book 1 in the EMBARK Science Fiction Space Opera series. Book 2 is available now. When fighting for survival deep in outer space, revenge is the real danger. Again, more details on that coming up. But real quick, as we close the show out this week, thank you so much for checking it out and hanging out through my promotion of my science fiction space opera novels. And I'll talk to you about, just briefly, what I would do if I was in charge of Star Wars and Lucasfilm. And this isn't definitive. This is just some things that I wrote down. I want connectivity within the content. I don't agree with people who say that if we make too many connections, it makes the universe too small. No, I want that connective material. These people, it's okay that these people know each other. We're being told about these particular individuals and these particular stories, so it makes sense that we're going to be hearing about these same characters and they're going to be connected in some significant way. I thought it was cool that George Lucas ended up making Anakin Skywalker having built C-3PO. I thought that was really interesting and fascinating, and to me it didn't make the world the universe and the galaxy and the storytelling any smaller at all. So here's a couple of things that I would do. Rian Johnson, why not go ahead and make Broom Boy the focus of your next series of films? Right? And let me put it this way. We have to assume Broom Boy doesn't have a family because he's stuck on Canto Bight and he's having to, work in the stables with these fathiers. And so there's already a setup for a story of an individual going on their own hero's journey without having a family. Being inspired by the events of what happened in The Last Jedi, you could take those characters, you could flash forward 5, 6, 7, 8 years, make him a very young boy going on his own hero's journey with a whole different set of adventures, right? Give us a story of Kira and Darth Maul. Tell us what happened next. Do it in a TV show or do it in a film, right? Let's see that. Tie it in with the follow-up to Solo and tell us the story of what happened with Han and Chewie going to meet Jabba the Hutt and have it lead right into how Han ended up on Tatooine in the Mos Eisley Cantina meeting them. I would love to see that. If we're going to be dancing around in the timeline of these films, then by all means, tell us how we ended up there, right? Tell me the story. Give me a Hera story from Rebels. And start it off with the battle over Scarif. And have it move into the timeline of A New Hope. Give us stories of Hera joining the rebellion, having her being a part of the events of the original trilogy from a different point of view and perspective. Can you imagine finding out that Hera was actually flying a snowspeeder in the Battle of Hoth? Can you imagine finding out that Hera was actually part of the battle on the Death Star? Or what was she doing at that point? I would love to see those stories in a major motion picture or in a Disney TV show. Again, use existing threads to move forward in the timeline. Going back to Broom Boy, post The Rise of Skywalker, Broom Boy, right, leading into another ensemble movie. So what I'm saying is, like, do what they did with the MCU and use the Broom Boy story, tell his singular story, tell a bunch of these singular stories moving forward, and then give us episode 10 involving these new characters that we've met. Tie things together in The Mandalorian into The Rise of Skywalker and TFA, right? Tie him into The Last Jedi. The Cassian Andor series. Take us back to Coruscant. Make that be a part of the storytelling. And with Obi-Wan Kenobi, there's a lot of different options available. I mentioned earlier the idea of perhaps having him come in and counter Darth Vader for some way, shape, or form, or a threat that's trying to track down Luke Skywalker and the Chosen One, and he has to leave the planet. Maybe, and this is way out there, but maybe, just maybe, Rey is related to Obi-Wan Kenobi. And maybe the Obi-Wan Kenobi series ends up telling us the story of who Obi-Wan Kenobi ended up being with. And that woman having a child, and that child ended up, that daughter of Obi-Wan Kenobi and whoever his love interest was ends up being the mom to Rey. How amazing would that be that we find that out in The Rise of Skywalker and the Obi-Wan Kenobi live-action TV series tells the story. I made a similar comment when it came to Kira and the possibility that there was a relationship there. And again, that's way out there on a limb. I'm not even saying that would be spectacular storytelling. I'm just saying of the possibilities. I think that Ewan McGregor, when it comes to the Obi-Wan Kenobi and him reprising the role, most likely will be the only time he's going to end up playing that role of Obi-Wan Kenobi again. Like, this is going to be the last time. I hope they walk that story up to the moment when he's walking through the Junglan wastes and he comes across Luke Skywalker and C-3PO and R2-D2 in the desert. And he does his yell. How great would that be? Walk it right up to that moment. Age Ewan McGregor and tell us why he set out on foot from his hovel to go find Luke. Just like we did with Rogue One. I think that would be absolutely spectacular. And I really hope that's what they end up doing, man. Start tying these stories together. Give us these threads to pull on. Expand the mythology and create this connective tissue of this world so that we can continue to talk about it on shows like this and continue to discuss it, because it is all together. Because guess what? We're all in this together as fans. What better way to treat the Star Wars storytelling than by making it relatable to how we all are? I connect with you guys all over the planet on a weekly basis. Why? Because I have this power of podcasting and the power of email and YouTube and the ability to share these things together. People from the UK and Australia and, all points in between, right? We're all connected together on this massive floating rock. Do the same thing within the Star Wars universe, and don't be afraid to think we're making the universe too small. We're not. We're making it relatable. All right, that wraps up the show for this week. Right now, support the show. If you've done so already and you've purchased either copy of my book, thank you. Go and get a copy for your friend. There's a link right there on the Amazon sale pages, right below where you purchase the books, where you can gift a friend a copy of the book if they're a Star Wars or science fiction fan. Right now, you can pick up EMBARK and Book 1 and Treasure in Darkness Book 2 as I work feverishly on Book 3, hopefully be out by the first of the year. You can pick both those books up for $1 a piece. 99 cents for the ebook right now. Support My Nerd World and a Star Wars podcast by picking up a copy of both books. Again, 2 great stories for $2. How great is that? You can also get the paperback for both books. Audiobook for Book 1 is available at a discounted price when you buy the ebook, by the way. Just about done with the audiobook for Treasure in Darkness. It should be available in the next 2 weeks. But if you purchase your ebook copy now, when you go to buy your audiobook for Treasure in Darkness, you'll be able to buy it cheaper. But please go and support the podcast and pick up a copy of both books. Again, each for 99 cents right now on Amazon.com. Just search for EMBARK and Jon, Jon Justice. I would greatly appreciate it. And once you're done reading it, please go and leave a positive review for either book on Amazon.com. That would really go a long way in helping me out. All right, thanks once again for checking out the show this week. Big shows, lots of shows next week here with My Nerd World. I hope you'll be back for it. Until then, I look forward to hearing from you. And speaking of Obi-Wan Kenobi, here he is to close things out.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.